What's going on, everybody? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. The community was in a bit of a ravenous uproar yesterday with the announcement of 5v5 for Overwatch 2. Very split on that decision. To try to help explain some of these things, there was a developer Ask Me Anything for content creators that I got to take part in and asked an unreasonable amount of questions, trying to make sure your guys' concerns get answered by the devs. There also will be another one on Monday for Reddit that anyone can participate in. So here we're going to go through the developers' responses to follow-up questions about 5v5, the changes to Overwatch 2, and as well other things we're concerned about for the live game. I've tried my best to organize these in a way that we can summarize it. So the first section we'll talk about is the balance of the game on the whole. General things they're going to be looking at or doing. The devs are asked about if they'll need to revisit all the heroes in the game and rebalance essentially everything. And they'll respond in saying that they're going to keep the spirit of every character and kit the same as you remember it within reason, but they do later go on to say that a lot of them are getting reworked. But yes, everything is going to be subject to change to some degree in order to fit in the 5v5 landscape and the map changes and everything else. They did say this on live stream as well, where a whole host of things is subject to change, like does McCree lose his stun? How would they have to balance Tracer if he didn't have one to deal with her? In that regard, a lot of things are still subject to change. The devs are asked how ultimates may work, either their charge time or impact on the game. The devs respond in saying in the past, they've globally tuned ult generation back and even directed specific balancing to a few heroes, but say they think it's in a pretty good spot at the moment and they'll adjust further as needed. They go on to say, we've been talking lately about looking at ults that feel kind of cheap and maybe adding more reasonable counterplay. For example, Pharah can basically blow someone up nearly instantly, but she usually dies for it. It might be more healthy if she wasn't so suicidal to use, but maybe gave a bit more warning somehow to the enemy as well. Though I still love the high potential of an ult like that, so we'd want to keep it high risk, high reward. Previously, the devs said that they might consider heroes swapping roles like Mei to tank or Symmetra to support. They're asked about this again, and they respond in saying that it's still on the table, but they haven't done any swaps internally yet, but it is an option they may utilize. The devs get asked about healing creep in the game and how long fights are sustaining. The devs respond in saying that Overwatch 1 had healing creep, where heals per second crept up slowly over time. Listen, I gotta get through a lot of stuff in this video, but I have to stop to draw attention to this being the way they're wording it. I'm gonna enjoy reading your guys' comments and responding to that. Moving on, he goes on to say, we've addressed this a little bit over the last year or so on live, but it's going to need a full revisit for 5v5. As you can see on the stream, sometimes in 5v5, the engagements can last super long, especially if both teams are focused on bringing the tanks down, which are pretty hard to do. Our goal is to keep team fights reasonably fast and not have them feel like they're dragging on, but we also don't want to lean on damage spikes, aka snipers or Ana nades only burst, let's say, to create this. He goes on to say it's a tricky problem because we've already done one experiment where we've reduced healing a bunch across the board to playtest it, and even if the game overall feels better, it feels really bad to play a healer, especially when you're trying to heal your tank. So we don't want to go that route. This is definitely something we're talking about all the time though. Okay, that's it for general balance concerns. Now we're going to go on to talk specifically about 5v5 from the tank's point of view. We'll have other sections in relation to 5v5 in general, but for now, just the tank. The devs get asked, in 5v5, will there be too much pressure on one player? They respond, yes, for sure that's a concern. The hope is that the new power level and flexibility of tanks and the gameplay changes to allow them to be more aggressive, do more damage, etc. will offset that. It's certainly something we've talked a lot about though. Next question. Devs are asked, on live, losing one tank player is a very big deal and makes winning a team fight incredibly difficult. If they say like pin off the map, how does that change in 5v5? And the devs say that hasn't really changed in 5v5, though tanks are more survivable in general, they're also harder to burn down quickly. And with their new role passives and possibly other CC reductions across the board, that also helps them survive and not just get chain CC'd until they die. I'd say so far our bigger concern is making sure non-tanks don't die too easily, especially versus snipers. This is something we need to be careful with. That is a very interesting point and looked pretty obvious. And I know this is something that players might see on the live stream and be immediately concerned about. Like, you take one tank out, they're one of the best ways to combat Widowmaker from just carrying the whole game. But in Overwatch 2, I think it's more constructive to think how they could rebalance that, and maybe Widow can't shoot as rapidly and takes a lot longer to charge up her shot to compensate for the lack of defenses in the game. But that's just one example of something you could imagine. Remember, they're looking to rebalance the whole game around this. All right, moving on. Next question. This is one of the many questions I asked, but it expands off of my previous video trying to help the devs communicate this swap, the concept of having two tanks, one main tank, one off tank. I think in the same way that the devs tried to explain how Overwatch 2 redefines the sequel, and a lot of people didn't get it, in the same way, I think a lot of players are confused on what the tank role is supposed to be. So I gave them a T-ball question. Is it better to just call them brawler and those old terms no longer apply? Which is to say, they are redefining the tank role. The devs responded saying, yeah, brawler is a great term. In fact, we've gone so far as to consider changing the name and icon of the category away from tank and into something like brawler, etc., which is something we still might do. It's hard to imagine picking a solo hog versus a solo Rhine right now, but you have to imagine this is in a world where everything is changed from what we have now. As far as making sure some heroes aren't unpickable, this will be something that we are constantly updating and balancing as we go, much like how we're doing on the live game right now. This might be something that requires a lot more discussion, but the short answer I want to tag on to this is that based on what they're saying, I think it's safer to assume that the concepts of off tank and main tank instead are both being connected into one category as brawler, where you're no longer competing to fit into one of those slots that we had in Overwatch 1, but instead the concept of the Overwatch 2 tank will be something very different and play differently. It'll make more sense, I think, when we finally get a playtest or something. Moving on, next question. The devs get asked about rethinking barriers altogether, which adds into this, brawler hybrid concept. They respond in saying, yes, that's one of the main wins from moving to one tank, that a barrier doesn't have to be the defining feature of the characters. It goes on to say, though this does not mean that Ryan's shield is going to be stronger to compensate for not having another tank. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We're pushing the tank role away from barriers being too dominant and trying to allow tanks to get into the mix more, dealing damage, etc. This also means everyone in the game is seeing and shooting barriers a lot less overall. I think a lot of players will be really nervous about that because playing around a barrier is like what Overwatch is to them. So you're just gonna have to strap in. Overwatch 2 is more of a hero shooter and less of a I stay in the protective shell of my Rhine shield so I don't die. We're gonna have to realize that the game's evolving past that to be more about using cover as opposed to having your hand held by the safety of defenses. So continuing this tank discussion, the devs are asked about in the 132 experiment, the characters got a lot of crazy tank reworks, like Roadhog got a take a breather that had an AoE effect that reduced damage for his team, which is pretty nuts. And they're asked how this plays into the decision to go to 5v5. And to the 132 question, the devs respond in saying, most of those crazy changes were pushed super far because having 3 DPS firing at you was rough and made it super hard to stay alive or keep your team alive. Then he pivots in saying, also to that point, we hadn't settled on this brawler direction for the tanks. So at that time, they were trying to make off tanks more like Rhine or Orisa, protection tanks. But once they started testing or talking about 5v5, they referenced that test and started saying, do players even want Roadhog and Zarya to be more like Rhine or Orisa? Which ultimately led us down the brawler path. And I've been talking to you guys on Twitter. A lot of people are really upset about this, thinking that like off-tank players are just kicked out of the game. I actually think it's more likely that off-tanks are more prevalent than main tanks. Because if you read what they're saying here, barriers are not going to be the defining feature of tanks anymore. You're expecting that because you're used to playing Overwatch 1. So instead, I think you can think of the brawler role to probably have the skill ceiling of like a lot of DPS picks. And rather than I need a shield in front of me to protect my team or we lose, instead it's gonna be more about how do I convert eliminations for the team, which takes form in all sorts of different ways. Which of course you guys know that if you've watched my previous year of videos on this, I've been saying this and charting this path all the way to this point, and it just gets more severe, it seems, each time we update you on it. So much so we're now like barriers are barely in the game, right? Like we already thought they got nerfed. Well, they're getting nerfed even harder in Overwatch 2, where you only can pick one at best. Okay, moving on to the next section. We'll come back to 5v5, but I thought it was really important to nag the devs about ranked. They got asked a lot of good questions from myself and other content creators. Very first thing, had to ask about alt accounts from so many levels of play, ruining the game. What are you gonna do, Blizz? Devs responded saying, good question about alt accounts. We'll be tackling this in different ways. One of the primary avenues we're looking at is trying to give the matchmaker more tools for determining your skill more accurately and faster. We want to better identify people repeatedly abusing alt accounts and action them appropriately. We're also looking at how easy it is to make these alt accounts. All that being said, there are legitimate reasons for players to potentially use a few accounts, so we have to balance those needs against the players who frivolously abuse the system. A decent answer, but we don't really get an ETA on this, nor do we really get a grip of the potency of this change. Though I will say, in their defense, the old rank system was more fluid, did boost you based on stats more, and there's downsides to that too, but since the game changes so frequently, I advocate that they go back to some of that a bit more again. I looked back at his response more closely, and I think when he says that they're looking at more metrics to define your skill, maybe I am right in guessing that IBM Watson with the Overwatch League is like a test case for what they're building with the stats overhaul in Overwatch 2. That's some big speculation, but I don't think it's out of the ballpark. We've been giving them feedback behind the scenes of the types of stats I care about and how in-depth it should be and how like outrageous the numbers might look like, right? Because I think you should be able to know not just every individual player's value output, but modify it based on the resources they get from the team. That's the tricky bit. You should expect a player who gets 5 cooldowns from the team to do more than a counterpart getting none. This is also why the gold medal system is pretty trash, because you might feel like you're doing everything, but not realizing that everyone else on the team's getting starved for help. Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm killing everybody. Everybody pick up the slack. It's like, yeah, well, I'm not getting healed. What do you want? Right? So a more in-depth scoreboard and stats and all that, that's hopefully what we're leaning towards for Overwatch 2, and that might help the Smurf issue. The better all those skills are understood, defined, and tracked. At the very least, utilize like seasons a bit more, which goes to the next question. How are you going to make seasons more impactful? Devs say, that's something we're looking at from the ground up. How long are the seasons? What's the role of placements? How do they make the middle of the season as exciting as the beginning and the end? What is the role and reward of all of it? Is there a way to make Season X feel different than Season Y so that you can remember and celebrate them more? A lot is on the table, so we'll see more for Overwatch 2. The devs get asked about queue times. Will 5v5 improve things? Very intelligent response on this one. The devs say, they said they've ran simulations, a lot of simulations, and they have data on how players have queued for every match of Overwatch and use that to run them. But it's tough to talk about the results of these though. On one hand, yes, it looks like 5v5 will reduce queue times, but human psychology plays a factor here. It's very difficult to know how many people queue for a particular role because they enjoy it or because they dislike queue times. As DPS players go down, is there a hidden group of players that have always wanted to play that role that might start queuing into it? And what he means is, if people learn that DPS queue times are better in Overwatch, is there like a hidden group of players that are going to come line up to play and then just ruin that entirely, right? So much of our assumptions on what the queue times are with the context we have now. Who's to say if the Overwatch 2 player pool doesn't have a even wider disproportionate number of DPS to tank players, even though you only need one to play a match, right? So there's all sorts of problems that could still happen, but generally speaking, yes, this should improve queue times. Next question. The devs are asked if there is a desire for tournaments in Overwatch. They respond in saying, is there a desire for an in-game tournament system? Yes. There absolutely is a desire to implement in-game tournaments, but we also want to make a lot of improvements to larger elements of competitive play first. So I sadly wouldn't expect to see such a system for quite a while, but how they would fit into Overwatch 2's larger competitive play ecosystem is something I'm keeping in mind as we work on Overwatch 2. And of course, I'm sad about that. Next question, because the game keeps getting balanced so fast, is there any way to make faster adjustments to SR? And the devs responded saying, we're definitely looking at ways and improving our matchmaker's view of your skill in the game. There are many challenges based on what heroes or roles a player plays, how much, how often, meta shifts, balance changes, and any value of SR is relative to the overall skill of the population of current players. And the entire player base improves over time. Okay, really complicated. He says, we are also looking at a possible SR decay system. If you come back to play Overwatch after taking a break, we don't want your experience to be getting stomped for a bunch of games because your SR is no longer calibrated well. There are also other possibilities we've considered for Overwatch 2 competitive, but can't talk much about them yet. Another follow-up question on Decay, worded a little bit different this time, saying that players can camp their SR pretty easily, despite that from season to season and patch changes, things shift a lot, but their SR doesn't seem to correct well enough, and it takes a lot of games in order for it to correct. Pretty similar to the previous question and answer. So the devs responded saying that's a tough question to answer because context matters a great deal here. A tremendous number of players play, learn, reach their appropriate skill level, and then their skill level doesn't change much at all because they're playing for fun and enjoyment instead of playing with purpose and with a plan to try and improve. All that being said, since SR is relative to the larger population, how their personal skill level translates into SR can change over time. That's one of the reasons we're looking at implementing a system like SR Decay. Yeah, this is always kind of tricky, and it's interesting from my point of view to hear the devs' response on this. They're always far more defensive for the type of players that play ranked very casually, which I think always makes the mode a bit tricky for any of us that don't play it that way or expect it to aspire to something else. But the way he's saying it here is that there's a lot of players that have their rank and just want to stay there, more or less. Don't really aspire to be much better, which to be honest, I can entirely understand because I get pretty bored needing to play flawlessly in order to compete up against the highest tier players in the entire world. But I also think that speaks to the limits of how fun ranked can be, and I wish we instead had other systems. Next question is really important, and it is to the phenomenon of flex queue players who often seem misplaced at their SR, but also very typically are weak on the role they're flexing into, usually tank. The question is the priority pass system staying, or is there any way to address this? The devs answer saying, we plan on keeping the priority pass system as it has helped with queue times, and we're always looking for ways to decrease queue times. The system will continue to see adjustments behind the scenes as we tune how it works. As far as people flexing tend to be worse than players who specialize, well, that might be true for many players. Do remember that they have a separate SR for each role, and they use the appropriate SR for the role that they are playing. Yeah, I mean, this type of answer from the devs is highway robbery and not really acceptable, to be honest, because I'll tell you, I went at great length to warn them that the off-roll SR is really off in the game, and I got a very muted response about it. Then the priority pass came in, and everyone complained about how off it was. It still isn't that great, so yeah. Let's not pretend like we didn't know this was going to be an issue and still is. It wouldn't be a problem if off-rolls were much more accurate and all the other things we talked about with the accuracy of SR and decaying and all that, but you can kind of see the issue here. Like, if you hit flex, those rolls you play less that you're flexing into for the good of the queue times were lower rather than higher, well, then you might not feel as much of a detriment on balance. But the fact is that is the case, and that's why players perceive this. So the question is apt, the community feels this way, and I wish the devs treated this issue with respect rather than kind of hand-waving it. But they did that with Power Creep 2, and then randomly years later then start using the term crept up over time and healing creep. So eventually they'll come around and make it seem like they agreed with this the entire time after they fix it. For now, they're in the denying stage, apparently. The devs are asked if there will be rewards for competitive, like diamond weapons. Quick answer, big paraphrase on this one, no. But there might be some other systems that act as rewards for playing competitively in Overwatch 2, but we're not ready to discuss those and they're still in development. So pretty interesting idea there. Next section, we're talking about new stuff they're adding to the game. Now that the game's in 5v5, how does that open up the heroes that you can add to the game? The devs say this is a great question. I think the biggest thing it allows is for us to be more free in how we design tanks. In the past, we were always like, how do we make a new barrier tank that is different but still interesting, and also isn't super annoying to play against, which can be a struggle. In a world where tanks are allowed to do more damage and dive into groups of enemies, it opens up a lot more opportunity for new ways tanks can work. Ryan's barrier isn't going away, we're just focusing on lowering its overall uptime so barriers don't feel mandatory all the time. This is all great news, especially when I'm excited for a hero that didn't get released, Maga, who was heavily teased and I think fits this idea to a T. Likely to have some sort of rage mechanic, I would assume. Next question, the devs are asked about social features in Overwatch 2, customizing your player profile with a bio, your favorite heroes, or ways to find players, make friends, especially from the same country or city. And that's an interesting addition I don't normally hear. You can, of course, do that outside the game, but it'd be cool to have some features in the game. Okay, all these things, this is what clans is, okay? So the question is basically, are we getting clans or something like it? And the answer is yes. We would like to add more social features for Overwatch 2. Some are fairly large in scope and some are smaller. I like the ideas that you suggested. The devs get asked about a scoreboard rework, and they say they're looking at both scoreboard and stats as part of our overhaul of many core systems in Overwatch 2. It's hard to really speak to the exact form these will take, but our values have shifted a bit since launch. For example, as a design group, we're not as committed to hiding individual teammates' individual stats during a match. That is actually like a really big move, okay? Because I'll admit, I've playfully mocked the gold medal system for years now, so it's nice to see that a more competitive, useful system may be on the horizon, but Overwatch 2, it seems like. The devs get asked about daily rewards or quests, which they have in a lot of their other games. Is this something that could come to Overwatch? They responded saying, yes, it could, but we don't have much in the way of details to go over at this time. I will say that I'm not as much designing around retention concerns, as in to keep players playing, but trying to make competitive systems more fun and helpful for players who want to try and improve their Overwatch skills over time while competing in matches that are fair and balanced. Oh, you're speaking my language, devs. That's interesting. And I'll pause here to say they distinctly refuse to talk about business model. So we weren't allowed to ask about free to play. They're just not even going to comment on it. But a response like this sort of shows you why they don't like free to play. Despite a lot of us thinking they need to do it, the downsides to it is that they don't want to have to be manipulating their player base into currency systems that have to force you to be retained on the game. We might go to that, but they will try to make that as pleasurable and fair as possible. I know, like, there's a big morality issue with that I know a lot of the devs don't really want to breach. I know Jeff Kaplan didn't want to breach it, so maybe that decision's already been made and that's why he left, who knows. But point being, they don't want to manipulate you. That's why they liked the fair business model of Overwatch 1. But at the same time, when other games are doing things like this, they retain players. So it's a double-edged sword. There's a clarification on the Overhealth mechanics in the game. They said this on the stream that all Overhealth is one thing, whether it's shields or armor or whatever, it's just green. But further, the devs say, I should have been more clear on this when I was on stream. The green health acts like normal health, so anyone who was able to give over armor, like Brig, is just weaker in this new system. We'll have to compensate for this as needed. As for Wrecking Ball right now, he still has that passive part of his over health not granting ult, but honestly, we might just remove that now that the tank passives already are providing ult reduction for attackers. Next up is 5v5 general discussion. Not just specific to tanks now, just more info about it. The devs get asked about a playtest or an experimental card for the 5v5 game mode, and the devs respond in saying almost everything is possible, but the question is timeline and how much work it is. If we are able to get testing for this, it wouldn't be on the experimental card. So a bit of a downer in that regard, but I think to decipher this answer, the real point is they don't want to delay how long Overwatch 2 takes. So although they can put effort in to try to make a mini test version of Overwatch 2 for everybody, if they can get good testing, it might be better to how long the development takes. So that's something to consider. Although, of course, we all want to try it immediately, right? But they're trying to get the game out. So understandable. Next question. The devs are asked about the point of view of DPS and support playing Overwatch with with one tank, because two tanks are very easy to interact with. They sort of act as a buffer to land abilities easily. Devs are a little confused on this question and said, I assume you mean with one less target to heal or damage and only one tank, the concern might be that everyone just focuses on the tank and target selection becomes less interesting. So far in our playtests, the game has shifted more towards trying to work around the tank, and I think he means away from the tank as opposed to playing with them, because he goes on to say either by flanking or just by firing angles around them. Of course, the tanks can apply pressure and make sure you can't just free fire. If anything, I'd say the opposite feels more true now, where you suddenly have a lot more opportunities to try to get picks on other targets and their healers are scrambling to try to keep everyone else alive. A concern I'm overall hearing a lot is how tanks are just going to be focused and die very quickly, but so far with our tuning and playtesting, that really hasn't been the case, in part because we've just made them tankier with more health, etc., but also because there is one less enemy firing at them. I think I said this earlier, but at least right now, our bigger concern is the pick specialist heroes, or pick-off characters, let's say, like snipers might just be too good right now without all the barriers to stop them. So I think this answer amplifies what I said in my previous video, where it's much easier to ignore the tank, essentially, because even if you do focus them, you might not have the firepower to burn them down. Whereas we're used to the Overwatch 1 version where it kind of goes boom or bust a little bit, that characters have the tools to easily kill a tank, but if the enemy team coordinate, then the tank kind of becomes too tanky, right? The devs get asked if 6v6 might return as a game mode and respond in saying maybe it's unknown right now. Some things to keep in mind though, a lot of the game is going to change around the idea of there only being one tank, especially in regards to hero design, balance, etc. This means if we did keep a 6v6 mode around, it wouldn't really feel like it does right now on live. It might not be super competitive. That doesn't mean we for sure won't support the option somewhere, somehow, but it makes it unlikely we'll have a competitive queue for it of some kin. Next question, will there be map reworks because Overwatch 2 is 5v5? Devs responded saying possibly. Most of the space in our maps work well for 5v5 from a size or square footage standpoint. A lot of our metrics deal with how heroes feel in certain spaces and what an object is rather than how many players are in a particular area. One of the interesting things to come from 5v5 is that players tend to use the environment more for cover than they did previously. This is an important skill in any shooter, and it's a little more prevalent in 5v5 than 6v6. The modifications that could potentially be made to some of the older maps are very discreet and probably rare extra pieces of cover for players to use. Imagine one extra phone booth in the street of King's Row. The next question talks about how difficult it was to try to perfectly balance two tanks and what it affords the devs to do now that there's only one. The devs respond in saying that the game was hard to balance before roll queue, and 5v5 is similar, especially when considering for all skill levels. They say, as an example, at the time that people were running GOATs, there were teams of 4 or 5 DPS in some comp queues. Human preference and psychology can't always be solved with a balance patch. So I think it's fair to say that this one tank idea is to intend to deal with this kind of problem and be another tool to stabilize the game in the same way roll queue was. Combos can be too OP at higher tiers, so 5v5 lets more tiers of play a more similar game. The next section is all about random stuff that didn't really fit, sort of miscellaneous. They are asked, what have been the most controversial decisions within the team? Devs responded saying there's been a few. Scoreboard, which they addressed earlier, have been a very controversial topic since work on the original game. They also really struggled with 2CP, and that's how he typed it. That's not me exaggerating it. But he says, we put a lot of time into trying to address its various problems. A lot of us, including me, are fans of the mode when it's working correctly. Some of my favorite Overwatch matches are in 2CP. It requires such a high degree of coordination on a team. When a match is close, it feels good, but when it's not, well, we've seen how people react. I think the fundamental problem with this mode is the percentage of great matches to matches with problems just isn't high enough. And as a design team, we weren't able to figure out how to fix it. We tried just about every suggestion we saw online too. It was very difficult to let go of Assault. Wait, did I just call it 2CP? Whoops. The exciting thing is we have some really great maps and modes to replace it. Speaking, of course, of the push game mode they have showed now a few times, which, yeah, push, I think, is everything Overwatch 2 wants to be. In terms of playing around cover, the shooter plays are more important. The game's not about huddling together behind your tank line so much. Not just the mode, but the way the maps work with how many flanks and how cavernous it is. I think, he's definitely right. Assault was very old Overwatch, where you might want to use your abilities and combos together to try to overwhelm the defense, and that's great when the team's working together. Not so great when they're not. Next question, they're asked, what was lost over the years of changes of development? Devs responded saying, oh boy, here we go. I'm probably gonna stir something up that I ought not to, but this is a pretty deep response, talking about the transformation of the game over the years. And the devs responded saying, the promise of Overwatch is to play anyone from this incredibly diverse set of heroes. If you remember Overwatch pre-launch, there was no hero limits. There was something magical about being able to just jump into a game and pick any hero that you wanted and then just start playing. As the game progressed more and more problems were encountered with this design, as a team, we didn't really feel like we would ever be able to solve this problem without drastically watering down individual heroes' gameplay. I think we made the right decision, but there are still times when I see people remembering this period fondly or even asking for it back. I understand the sentiment, but we felt like the right decision for the game was to try to keep what we felt was the essence of Overwatch gameplay, heroes with amazing abilities working together for a common objective, while pivoting on a feature that, while fun, brought with it a host of problems that we might not ever be able to solve. I'm confused a little bit by this wording. Of course, this is all in text form, and we can't really have follow-ups, but I think what he means is that they fought hard to try to keep that sense of majesty, but to some degree, you have to make the game make sense at the same time. And perhaps, this 5v5 change is just another one on the list next to role queue and single hero limit that are in that conflict. So opinions are across the board with this type of thing and in the dev team as well. But ultimately, they have to do the best thing for the most players. So next question, will 2CP maps be reworked into other modes? The answer is maybe, but as it might require so much of a rework, it might be better to just build a new map, because like a payload needs a path to go down and a lot of space, so there might not be enough map there in order to do that. Or, and I'm paraphrasing this part heavily, but there just might not be cover in the right place for the fights to make sense. Based on his response, I wouldn't anticipate them to do that. And last bit of miscellaneous, they're asked, what is the plans for dev updates? The community lead responds in saying, we're committed to being more communicative this year about Overwatch and Overwatch 2. While I wish I could say once a month, I just can't make a guarantee right now. We'll definitely try to keep them coming frequently, with a hopeful goal of releasing one per month, or at least every other month. We're still working from home right now. And that's it. That's everything from the AMA the content creators had. Keep in mind that a public Reddit AMA is taking place on Monday, May 24th on r/Overwatch. So you can head over there. I'm assuming a similar time period, but probably stay tuned to Play Overwatch's Twitter to know when that is properly going live. But in any case, we will be looking through the devs' responses in that AMA as well and making content on it. So if you want to make sure not to miss out on our videos, be sure to click the bell icon to properly be updated when our videos come out. Link in the description is our Twitter, where we've been having more conversations with you. Check us out on there. But that's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.